Welcome back, everyone, to Compliance Chronicles. So today we're diving into a topic that will hopefully interest different people, because we're diving into a topic that sometimes conflicts with compliance. So we're going to be looking at the business areas such as sales, retention, acquisition, which are commercially focused. And to do that, today we've got a guest with us who has over a decade experience in sales and leading sales teams in a highly regulated market, probably one of the most highly regulated markets. And he has somehow managed to juggle the challenge of achieving great sales and financial success with the balance of complying and meeting compliance regulations and laws. So we're joined today by Jacob. And so I'm going to dive straight in with the questions straight away. And the first question I had, which was planned for you, is as a sales manager, why do you hate compliance, Jacob?
I definitely don't hate compliance, and thank you for having us on, and great to spend some time with you this evening. It's always an interesting question about sales and compliance, and I think, is there always been that battle? Is there always been a divide between the two? But I think it depends on who you talk to, really simply.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where we've evolved out of that in our minds, we've evolved out of that balance and that conundrum and that conflict. But have we really? So you've been in the insurance industry for over a decade now.
Yeah.
So there must have been times where your sales objectives have clashed with your compliance requirements. So tell me then, from a outside in, how have you dealt with that? What does it look like now compared to what it looks like maybe, 10 years ago?
I think it's a good question. And I think the best place to start with that is it depends on how you see compliance in the first place and how you see sales in the first place, right? And I think you can't compare one without the other. When you're in a regulated environment, they're equally as important. You can't make sales without compliance, and you can't make compliance without sales. They both go hand in hand. And if you do one at the detriment of the other, risk happens. Really simply, you will basically lose customers, you will lose trust, whatever that is. And if you are so focused heavily on compliance, then there may be a little bit of fear. You may not be as confident in your phone calls, and then you may not make the sales that you're looking to do. So I think there has to be an equal focus between sales and compliance. And if you do it well, and you hit the sweet spot, you can do really well.
What happens if you don't do it well, or your team don't do it well? What's the impact? So if we look at first, what's the impact on the sales team when it comes to if the compliance impacts them hitting their targets? What happens then?
There's two ways that you can look at that, and you can look at that from both sides. So if a sales agent is not achieving their targets, they don't feel like they're fulfilling their duties, right? Their job and what they're employed to do is to sell. So if they're not doing that in the way that you'd like them to, you've got to coach them. You've got to support them. You've got to upskill them. You've got to really help them to get to them to that level where they need to be. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is from a compliance lens is where they are overstepping the mark, really simply. And an example of that would be where an agent in our business is selling to a customer and they're not doing it in the right way. They're not doing it ethically, or they're breaking the compliance obligations that the business has. So we have to obviously feed that back to the agent, because it's really important because we want to make sure that they get it right. We want to make sure that our customers are getting a positive customer experience, and compliance and selling go hand in hand with that. So we have to make sure that we do it, and we do it the right way, because that is the only way to do business, really, for me, is do it the right way.
It's a great answer, by the way. It's almost like it's rehearsed. Yeah. But what are some of from your team's perspective, what are some of the common misconceptions that sales team members have of compliance?
Again, a good question. They think that compliance is out to get them sometimes, right?
We are.
And it's interesting. I had a conversation with a very nice agent in one of the teams, and he was under the impression that compliance would get would get commission if they gave him a compliance fail, right? Would be great if that actually happened, but it doesn't. And that's, again, a misconception that he had. He felt that compliance would be motivated to give him a compliance fail. Not the case, because compliance are not monetized in that way. But compliance want the same thing. They want the business to succeed. They want the business to have customers who have had a positive customer experience. And I think they sometimes, between sales and compliance, sometimes sales feel that compliance are out to get them, but vice versa, compliance feel that sales don't actually listen to the feedback that they're given. I think that sometimes that's where you need to step in, and that's where you need to be the sound of reason. That's where you need to bring both teams together and actually talk to it and say, right, this is what we can do to work together and collaborate. I think that's been probably one of our key successes that we've done, is how do you calibrate as a team? How do you work together, as opposed to finger pointing, because that can easily happen.
You got to tell us more about that. How was that achieved? Because that's not an overnight thing to get that alignment between commercial and compliance. That sort of embedding of culture doesn't come easily. So how was that achieved where you work?
It's achieved over a period of time, and I think where you embed compliance, it has to start from the ground. It has to start from when someone onboards in the business. How do you talk to compliance in your forums? How do you talk to compliance in your sales teams, in your meetings, in your buzzes, or any sort of day-to-day activities that you're having with your team? You have to talk to compliance in a positive light. If it's talked in a negative connotation, then they think that's the tone, and that's okay. And in the industry that we're in, it's really important to set the tone right from the get set. So talking to the staff about the positive influence that compliance can have. Compliance, I see it, is only there for one reason, and that is to keep the business doors open. They're there to help and support us, not to hinder us. Depends on what mood you're in, depends on what's being asked of you, but the reality is they are there to help protect the business. They're not there for any other reason, They play an important role. And I think sometimes we can often overlook that. And I think sales can play their part in that too, where they need to play their part and take the feedback for how it's intended to help, to improve, and to keep the business doors open, quite simply.
Amazing.
Give him a job in
compliance. I know. Amazing answers here. So I think the next point, or the question I have for you then, is that from your experience, how do you feel that sales, especially in the insurance sector where you've got dual regulation, you've got the FCA and PRA, understands regulation? Because that's where compliance comes from, right? So in order to understand compliance, you have to understand the regulation. How, from your experience, has sales understood regulation, and do you think it's improved over time?
It has to have improved, and the reason being is that there is much more regulation nowadays. So if you think about over the last, say, 4 or 5 years, GDPR has been something that's been introduced, right? And the way that you have to communicate with your customers, the way that you talk to your customers has changed. So there's things that have had to evolve around sort of marketing preferences, consent, those sorts of things. That's been an evolution of what we've had to do. We didn't really have to do that 10 years ago. The way that we sold 10 years ago to the way that we sold now are completely different. I think we're much more transparent now in what we do, but I think that's a good thing. I think letting the customer know what we're going to do, the journey that they're going to go on, I think it's important. And especially with how much social media, how much customer satisfaction surveys there are out there nowadays, you can look at a company and you can rate a company very quickly through a customer satisfaction survey. And it's good to be able to do that because it puts the power and the control in the customer's hands.
Yeah.
And I think we should be able to do that because you are providing a service for a customer. And I think sometimes we can forget that. It's not about the person that's on the phone that's selling the policy. It's about the person at the end of the phone who you are either providing a product, a service, or on a bigger scale, you're providing to a business as well. So it's not just regulated sales. You are speaking to a person and you've got to make sure you help them.
And we've got the ideal salesperson in the room today, But do you think that's a perspective or a attitude shared by other sales professionals in terms of they actually understand regulation to understand why compliance are putting these processes in place, these procedures upon the business, or are you an alien? Are you somebody who's just an outlier?
Compliance plant.
No, I don't think necessarily people are born that way, right? I think I'm being surrounded by good people, and you also trust the process of what you're talking about. And I think you become a creature of your environment, right? And I think you absorb the stuff that you want to, but also the stuff that you believe in as well. And I think what the original question that you highlighted there, no, people don't necessarily come in with that same mindset. You can have some sales agents that come in and guess what they just want to do? They just want to make a quick sale and they want to move on to the next one. They're in it for the money, they're in it for the commission. But the reality is that will be a short-term solution, but will cause us a long-term problem, because the reality is if they don't understand the compliance obligations within the business, they're going to come unstuck. And where they're going to come unstuck is they're going to get more compliance fails, they're going to be audited more regularly, they're going to have even more regular check-ins, more intense check-ins with their manager to help improve their performance. But the reality is we have to make sure that we're getting the people that are like-minded, people that share the same values and goals as us, but also within our hearts of hearts, help them and support them to get them to that level, because no one comes into the sales industry going, I'm going to be a salesperson. No one does that. Yeah. Not at school, not at college, or not at university, whatever. But you find yourself in sales because there is something about the buzz. There's something about helping a customer. And I think that's why people find themselves in sales. So in short, no, but you have to work at it.
Do you mind me just asking one other question on that point then? Because you mentioned audits. Okay. So question is, have you ever been in a regulatory audit? And if so, how does the sales department, how do you view and see when a regulatory audit is happening or about to happen? Is it a frantic preparation, or is it like that's got to be compliance? They'll sort it out.
It's everyone's responsibility. So we have an ISO accreditation at our work, and we have I think an annual or every 2 years we have an auditor come in, and they audit in many different things, right? It's everyone's responsibility. I think sometimes it's quite rightly pass the buck, someone else's responsibility to take care of that, but actually you all play a part. I work for head office, so fun enough, always our site gets audited, so a lot of the responsibility falls on me and my team and the agents that I work with, but it's everyone's responsibility when something like that happens. You've all got to play your part. You've got to be a good team player, and sometimes that's easier said than done, because some people don't want to be a team. They want to be a maverick, or they want to be solo. But you've got to work at it, and it's a team effort when it comes to stuff like that.
Yeah, I just made a note. Something you said a few questions ago about the transparency within the business that's been embedded, and that you currently have, which is a great thing. The question I had was the transparency that's currently in place and the transparency that you have with your customers as well, because you mentioned that. Is that based on an ethical decision or based on the fact that it's enforced by regulation?
I think that's a good question, but when I'm thinking about what you're referring to and what you're saying there, it really comes down to that they are one and the same, really. And what I mean by that is, you've mentioned there about the ethical part of it and about it being forced, but you're in a position where there's quite a lot of regulations out there now. So there's only one way that you have to abide by some of those regulations. So some of it will be forced. But if I take a step back, we've generally sold, and we've generally had those same conversations with our customers throughout that journey, with the intention to help protect a life. You know, if I'm in the life insurance industry, so that's where my passion and that's where my experience comes from. So we're protecting a life at the end of the day. You're not making a sale. You're protecting a life, and there's so much more power when you say that. So I think it's there's different ways that you can look at that answer and look at that question, to be fair.
I have to ask one more question, because everything you've said so far, I think, is like the dream from a compliance perspective, because it sounds like you've got a really good relationship and a mutual respect with your compliance department. And there will be a lot of people that are listening to this that don't have that within their business. And we see it all the time when we go to audits or when we're working with companies, that one of the biggest tensions they have is, well, the business doesn't support us. The business is focused on trading, acquisition, whatever it is.
Okay.
For them people listening, what would be the advice, or can you give us some context to how that's been established? Is it thanks to a great compliance team that you've got and the way that they come across with the way they embed training and policies? Is it because of you and your team, the way that you've allowed compliance to be forthcoming? How has that been established? I know you mentioned earlier on that, it's just part of the business. It's embedded in the culture from when people come in.
Yeah.
But there has to be more to that, because that just seems too easy, that, okay, when new joiners come, we embed it. But there has to be more steps that have been taken.
Yeah, I think there is. And I think you've highlighted a couple of points there, but the reality is you are a cog in a big machine, and every little cog builds up to one big part. So it could be your onboarding team, it could be your sales team, it could be your compliance team, it could be your in-house quality assurance team. It's everything embedded. But it comes back to the principle of how seriously do you take it. If everyone takes that with the right intention and understands the value of it and what it can do for the business and how important it is, then I think you're onto a winner. And I think the key part there is, if someone was to get a fail in our business, play them the downstream impact. And what I mean by that is, what impact has that had to the customer? What impact has it had to the processes of what we have to follow in the business now? So it's not just, this customer has had a bad experience from us. It's how do you play it out as the downstream impact? And I think if you educate in that way, full circle, and you do that every time when someone makes a fail, if you were, then guess what? You're sharing that best practice. Everyone's learning in that. And I think that's one part of it, about the downstream impact. Even sharing when someone makes mistakes. When someone makes a mistake, how do you share it? Yeah, we don't put their name out there because we don't want to name and shame. But what's the reason why someone made a fail? How did they make the fail? What could have caused and contributed towards it? And having a platform to share that. So currently we use just Teams to share when someone makes a fail. And what does that fail entail? By sharing someone when they make a mistake, you're putting some positive light on that feedback, so someone else doesn't make that mistake. So there's many different things that you can do. There's many different cogs that lead to that big picture of compliance being an important and integral part of a sales journey and a sales process, and vice versa, because they go hand in hand. There's not every team plays a part, and I think that's how you win championships. Every team plays a part. It's the physio, it's the starting team, it's the coaching, it's the background, and I think that's the success that I've seen. It's a team all rowing in that same direction, and that is because it's about the philosophy, it's about the vision, and how it's been communicated down, and making sure you have the right people who believe in that same philosophy and vision too.
And as a salesperson, because you are that,
I am, yeah.
How have you managed to maintain that's your sales strategy, your sales performance, whilst ensuring that compliance requirements are adhered to, given the fact there's additional and continuous level of scrutiny over the last, like you said, things how they are now are not how they were 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So how have you managed to maintain your performance? Because you're at the top of the game, essentially. So how have you managed to maintain that performance whilst having the attitude you have to compliance?
I think you learn by doing, you learn from listening to others. And I think one of the key areas that's really helped me to stay at the levels that I am is when you actually take a moment to listen to others. A lot of the time you think I know it already, right? But no one does. You know, you learn from others, you share best practice, and you take and you not steal, but you take from other people, you make it your own, and you go. And I think that's what I've been able to do over the last 15 years that I've been in sales. Is you learn from others, you share best practice, and you also got to wake up every morning and have the right attitude, the right mindset, and the right desire. As soon as that changes, you're tapping out, you know. So that's the most important thing, is about, before you even go into work, is about having those right principles in place. I'm quite a half full kind of guy. You have your moments, everyone has their moments, you know, but that's the way to be in life for me, is making sure that you have that right mindset, but learning from others, surround yourself with people who are actually going to elevate you and how you can learn from them, and then having passion for what you do.
I think if you're looking to go into a different sector of work or different department, there's definitely a role for you in compliance for sure.
Or selling compliance.
Yeah, selling compliance. Yeah. But I think we mentioned customers and consumer protection and, you know, customer journey. But overall, how do sales in your experience perceive and understand general compliance? So not just, you know, consumer protection, but like financial crime, right? So how do they perceive financial crime? If we're looking at, you know, life insurance, like you're saying, there's been quite a few significant regulatory enforcement in the UK over the past few years, namely HSBC Life, which I think got a £63 million fine for, you know, financial crime failings in their controls. Because a lot of people don't really align financial crime risk to insurance. How do you do that? How do you understand that? How do you get your teams to understand that?
Well, compliance is, again, you know, there's so many umbrellas when it comes under compliance. And I think my expertise is not in that, right? I'm not gonna try and sell you a dream. I can sell you life insurance, but I can't sell you a dream on financial crime. But I know for a fact that something like that we would take seriously. If anything was like that come to our attention, we would definitely report it through the appropriate channels. If we'd raise it, we'd make sure that we take things and we'd feed it into our compliance team, who are a very pragmatic bunch. You know, they want to help and support. They don't want to put barriers up. They want to help and support us. And it was interesting because I was reading, fun enough, I was reading a paragraph in a story, and I think it was something that you wrote, seeing compliance as risk management, you know? And I think that's interesting that you position the team in the name of the compliance, because compliance does seem quite outdated. It's quite an older name, isn't it? And it has quite a negative turn to it. But when you actually think about it, I think some of the stuff you've highlighted in previous podcasts, problem solvers. It's a word that you use as well. Risk management. I think that is what it's all about when it comes to it. So, but yeah, financial crime. It's not something that I'm an expert in. I'm not going to tend to be, but it's something that if something like that was to happen within our industry, I definitely think, especially in the business that we're in, we would definitely take that seriously.
And so how does the compliance team educate the sales teams in the businesses that you've worked in over the last decade or so? And can you give examples of like good compliance interaction with sales and the education piece, and bad examples?
Yeah, it's got better over the years, and I think that's been enforced by things like GDPR, you know. But I think a great example of that is regular, like, e-learning. There's different e-learning platforms that you can do, and something that we have in our business, which I think is fantastic. On a monthly basis, you have an e-learning portal that everyone has access to, and I'll have to log in there and I'll have to go and do some online courses. It'll be things around cybersecurity. It'll be things around other elements of compliance. There'll be financial crime in there. We recently had our end of year assessments, so a lot of my team are rushing to go and do that. They waited for it to the end of the year to get it all done, because we're a bit more quieter at the end of year. But using that time wisely. So I think e-learning is a great way. That's something that's, I think, is a positive. Trying to bring a bit of fun to something that can be quite wordy. It can be quite mundane, and I think that's why maybe people put it off. But having it on an e-learning portal makes it quite effective, and it helps. I also think we have regular audits, so compliance can and do they dive in and they have a health check of our business. They'll listen to some sales, some non-sales, and they'll provide feedback on what they've heard, where the teams can be better, what they've done well. And I think that's where some of the success comes from, that openness. Like, feel free, if you've got a team who are opening into your calls, and we're open for them to have a look because there is no hiding place. You know, they can feel free to look in at any time because any call can be listened to at any time, you know. That's really important. So if you can have that openness, that healthy feedback loop, that's where I think a lot of success comes from. Healthy tension is what I like to say.
You've told us about how the culture is embedded and there's a good culture of compliance understanding, but then you just said then that the teams will leave their compliance training till the end of the year.
Yeah,
that's a massive conflict. If culture's embedded, why are they not doing it more proactively? Why are they having to wait till the end of the year?
But I think that comes down to something that you can put around. Again, there needs to be more discipline by team leaders, by myself as a contact center manager.
Why discipline? If that's embedded in the culture, surely they should be, okay, I've got my compliance training to do, the module's just been added, I'm going to go on and do it.
Yeah.
I'm putting you on the spot now.
You are indeed. And I think it's a good question. But again, that comes down to the person and the individual, right? And if you think about it, they don't necessarily want to do it when the marketing's there, right? You know?
Yeah.
When the marketing's there, they want to be on the phone. They want to be conversing with their customers, because when they converse with their customers, there is an opportunity then for them to make sales, make commission, so on and so forth. And when you get to a quieter time in the year, then it's better use of time is how they see it. But I can understand that. It's something that you want to keep up with, and that's why it's fed in monthly. But yeah, they've been end stacking it and just waiting till the end of the year to do it. So
listen, and it's not, you know, exclusive to you and your team. We see it time and time again where mandatory training is put off until the last minute, or sometimes it's even disregarded, because coming back to what you said a little while ago, I hate the name compliance, but they see compliance as a hindrance and as a this is something that's being enforced on me. Yeah. And that's why I was asking the question, because I see it time and time again.
I want to cut you off. Do you know why? Because it's funny that you mentioned that word hindrance, because I was researching some surveys on sales and
this better be good if you
sales and compliance. And it was actually a survey from InsurTech, and it said that whilst there's been improvements, there's still a fundamental stereotype that compliance have on sales and sales have on compliance. And there was two words they used, and the way sales sees compliance is hindrance, or one word, and the way that compliance sees sales is aggressive. So I just thought it was really pertinent that you used the word hindrance, and actually within the survey still has that connotation. Compliance has a hindrance connotation, and sales has an aggressive connotation.
That's why we wanted Jacob on, really, because it is that other side of the fence, and it is to get your perspective. And that is why I was asking that question, is maybe the reason they're putting it off is, I know you're saying, let's say marketing's gone out this month, so they know that there's going to be sales to be made. Yeah. But that to me sounds like, well, if you've really got the culture that you were telling us about, then they wouldn't be choosing to focus so heavily on sales. Or I know they're targeted, so let's say they are, but they would say, you know what, even though I've got to hit my sales target for the day, I'm going to stay an extra 30 minutes and I'm going to complete that e-learning, because that's equally as important to me as achieving my goals. Yeah. It doesn't sound that way. And this isn't a criticism, because we see it time and time again. Yeah. And I suppose where I'm going with it is what I'm trying to look for is, for us as well to solve this conundrum, is how do we get it so people don't see compliance as a hindrance and they see it as an asset and they see it as a tool? Is there anything you would suggest that for people listening could say, right, you want your guys that are in trading, in acquisition, in sales to focus and meet their compliance objectives? This is what I suggest. Is there anything like anything that now from this you go back to your guys and say, you know what, I had this chat the other day and it came up that it's maybe a bit of a problem, you're leaving training until the last minute.
Yeah.
So this is what I want to suggest.
It's interesting. I had a chat with one of my managers over the last few days and we spoke about this, and I think it's just a monthly reminder in their emails, and given the agents time to do that.
What about incentivization? So, for example, I imagine your guys.
I was going to say that, by the way. I was
Go on, you go.
No, it's fine. But you.
How so? When you say incentivising, what's your thoughts on that?
So, one of the things that I always try to do when I try and embed in a culture of compliance is focus on the positives. I hate the fact that compliance is always seen as we're here to enforce the rules. We're the enforcers, and we're going to punish you when you don't achieve what we want from a compliance perspective. Mm-hmm. I much prefer the carrot over the stick. So I much prefer to reward good compliance as opposed to punishing bad compliance.
Okay.
So what I mean by that is if your sales guys are incentivized, obviously, to achieve sales targets, do you think there is value in also incentivizing them in meeting their compliance objectives? And do you do that? It might be something you do.
So we're more stick than carrot in that respect, and I'll explain that now. If someone doesn't hit the compliance obligations, they won't make their commission on that sale.
Okay.
So we take the serious route of it, and if someone continues to go down that route, then they'll find themselves in performance management. So,
I don't think that is stick. You are financially incentivizing them to follow compliance rules.
We want them to do it right. We want them to give the customer the best possible service and a positive customer outcome. If you do that, you're gonna keep your commission, you know. And I think the other side of that is if they don't do it and they continue to do it after all the feedback that you've given them, then we'll take more steps towards informal performance management. And I think that's an important part of it, is the discipline that you have towards it. So KPIs. And how you KPI compliance. It has to be there has to be a number or a target that you're looking to achieve as a business, as an objective. If you target something, you've got something to work towards. And I think sometimes maybe businesses don't have an objective or a target or a vision what they want for their sales and their compliance team to achieve together. So that may be something that listeners out there can consider. Do you have a compliance objective? Do you have a target? Do you have a vision that you want to do together? Because then you're both working towards that same goal. You may achieve things differently from a compliance and from a sales perspective, but the reality is if you have a KPI or a goal or a target that you're looking to achieve, and you're both working towards that, that gives you a starting point. I'm a big believer in what gets done gets measured. And I think the best way for us to do that is if you put a number out there, and it may be a stretch, it may be a target that you can achieve, but it's a starting point.
Yeah, and I think it's like you said, it's almost like how you dress up something. Alex said, "Oh, he'd rather the carrot over the stick," and then you mentioned the process you have in place where you believe it's more of a stick than a carrot. But if we dressed up a different way and said, "Look, you achieve your commission if you achieve your compliance requirements as well," that just flips the script all the way back to actually being a carrot rather than a stick. And then you mentioned KPIs. I actually had that in my head actually before you even mentioned it.
Really?
Are there any KPIs that you've introduced then that are compliance led that you've seen have a positive impact then on the performance of your team? And if so, can you give us some examples of a few of those?
Yeah, well, if you think about it, they have their calls monitored, right? And they get their calls monitored, risk-based monitoring. So there'll be some parameters in place where our in-house quality assurance team will listen to some phone calls, and they'll listen to ensure that the calls are compliant. So roughly 20 to 25% of their sales calls can be listened to. That gives you a good number to have a health check of your business. And we have some tolerance that we need to make sure that we achieve to keep, obviously, compliance teams happy, to keep our underwriters happy, those sorts of things. So it's really important to make sure that we have that. And that's a good little health check for our business, because if we feel that we're not achieving at the goals that we're looking to, then there has to be a root cause analysis done. Why haven't you achieved that? What is the common area that you're falling down on? How can you then enforce that into your contact centers? How can you share that message with your teams, and be positive and proactive about it? So I think it's making sure that you do that, because for us it works, it's successful, and I would challenge anyone that doesn't have that, because it's really important to have that level of, you can call it professional scrutiny. That's what it is. And it's good. And I think it's good to have open feedback and be scrutinized, because guess what? That's when you start to learn things about you, yourself, your team. It's important to have that. And I think it's healthy.
It's healthy when it's internal. When you've got an external regulator doing that, applying that same level of scrutiny, it can be quite stressful for companies, and especially compliance departments.
Yeah.
But one of the questions, which leads me on to one of the questions I was going to ask, is the way you're regulated, right? So you're regulated by the FCA. You've got consumer duty. You've got TCF, treating customers fairly.
Right.
And then you've got your insurance conduct of business sourcebook, which you guys, which you guys have to follow. Do you think that these, because they are, well, ICOBS isn't, but consumer duty is still kind of fairly new.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's is having a positive impact for customers because of the way now there's a bit more openness, and you mentioned at the beginning transparency.
Yeah.
So do you think there's been a positive impact from that change in regulation?
I think so. When it first come in, probably not. You know,
we had a chat about it when it first came in.
We did, because it was, again, it's quite new. It's quite new. It's quite raw at the time. What is this? What does it even stand for? What does it mean? But you have to do your research. You have to do your due diligence and try and understand it. But when you think about it, what does it do? It is transparency. The customer can understand like where you've got their data from, what you're going to do with their data. I think that's really important. It's really important to have that level of transparency, because guess what? If you're speaking to someone over the phone and they understand that, it builds something. And a word that I often use with my staff and we talk to is the word trust, right? You are trying to build a level of mutual trust with the person that you're talking to. And if you can do that, that goes a long way, because you're not seeing someone, you're not talking to them face to face, you can't read their body language. So you're doing this over a phone call, where body language is much easier to read. You can read someone's body language when you're sitting across from them. If you're doing face-to-face sales or you're in a meeting with them, it's much easier to read body language. But over the phone, you're trying to build that trust. So transparency is a big thing of that. And I think now with the GDPR regulations, I think it's made it more transparent. And it's also transparency in two ways: transparency for our staff and transparency for the customers. And what I mean by that is our staff knowing where the data's come from. And then they may have to share that with a customer, because if a customer says, tell me, where did you get my data from? You have to share that information because it's important to, right? So that's where I think transparency has been positive. And I think it has been. And I think it will continue to be.
So I'm a big fan of ICOBS and the fact that it forces firms to have to be transparent, to have to be open. And the fact that you've already embedded that is a huge positive. But let me reverse it a little bit. So with that, there is an obligation that you have to explain to customers the risks, the what's the word?
We use it in life insurance. It's limitations and exclusions, right?
Perfect.
Is the words that would be.
So that must have an impact negatively on sales. If that's so, and forgive me, I don't know the sales process you guys follow, and I don't know how much you can disclose.
Yeah.
But let's say, for example, you're on a sales call and you're making good progress, but then you get to that point. Oh, I've got to now explain. It's kind of I've got to read out the small print type scenario. Can that impact the outcome of a sale, whether it goes through or not?
Yeah, 100%. And for an agent in that moment in time, the walls have come in, right? I've got so close, but yet so far. But
so then that leads me on to a question.
Go for it.
Your guys are incentivized to make sales, right? I imagine there's some sort of commission or bonus scheme in place, like most sales roles. Mm-hmm. They're incentivized to achieve their targets. And going on to what you said a minute ago about they can get the stick if they don't meet their compliance don't meet their sales targets. So you hit your sales targets, there's a financial reward for you. You don't hit your sales targets, and stop me if I'm wrong at any point. If they don't hit their sales targets consecutively and consistently, I imagine there's a chance they could lose their job. I imagine. as with any job, you don't hit your KPIs continuously, there's a risk.
Yeah.
So you've got a financial incentivization to reach your sales targets. You've got the risk of losing your job if you don't reach your sales targets. Then you've got a customer you're about to sell to, but I've got to read out this blueprint and it could cost me the sale. Surely you're incentivizing your sales staff to cut corners and just maybe this time I won't read out that, you know, there's this blueprint, there's this small print here. Do you not think there's a bit of incentivization there for them to cut corners, and then how do you get around that?
Well, if you think about it, in that moment in time, they could chance it. You know, they could cut corners, but ethically, is that the right thing to do for someone who's protecting their own life or protecting their family? And it's comes down to that morals and ethics. You know, that's what it comes back to. So there's every chance that a person can do that, but why would they? You know, why would they? If they
Because they're going to reach their target.
They're going to reach their target, but that's a short-term goal. In reality, let's play that scenario out. This person then claims, for some reason that claim doesn't happen. What's the downstream impact there? Because that agent in that moment in time done that wrong.
What is the impact? Like for my own explanation, like, because I don't understand, what would the impact be if that customer's made a claim and it turns out that something was wrong in the way they were sold the policy? What would the impact be there?
Well, again, if it's the agent's responsibility, if it's the agent's fault, you know, it's on the business. Business has to pay it.
Okay.
You know,
so the financial loss for the company. Yeah. Do you have reporting obligations as well to the regulator?
Not to my knowledge, but again, that's not my expertise. You know, but in that scenario, it's you have to deal with it. You know, but as a business, we may have to take the hit because that call gets listened to, which it will. The claims process would listen to it. And if someone hasn't been told a detail of that, you didn't tell me this. It depends on the limitation and exclusion, but the reality is it'd fall in the business would have to pay it. Yeah. And rightly so. Yeah. Because end of the day, it's the agent's responsibility to make sure they give the key facts, the limitations and exclusions.
There's a lot hanging on the sales agents. A lot of trust.
And that's why it's sometimes it can feel like a double-edged sword. You know, in that role, because you've got to make sure that you do things the right way. But it's a blast when you're not focusing on that. It's a blast when you're just focusing on having a great conversation with a customer. How can you help them? How can you understand their problem? How can you provide the product as a solution for them? And that's really the key thing. Just looking at it as a conversation like we are having now. It's the same thing. You're trying to have a conversation with a customer to understand their needs and to provide the product as a solution to the problem. And you can only really do that by asking great questions, being open, being conversational, and then position the product in a way that's going to help suit their needs.
But then how do you, because we had the Consumer Duty Act, right, which has come out in the last couple of years, which is providing even more scrutiny on businesses having to provide a service or product which is customer led. Mm-hmm. We had a conversation off camera as well around the client base for insurance being almost like inherently vulnerable. You mentioned a couple of criteria of customers, either when they've had a bereavement, either they've bought a new home or they've had a new family or baby. So essentially everyone in that scenario is kind of vulnerable to wanting to do best for themselves or their family. Mm. How do you then create a product and service which is going to work for the business but be customer led at the same time? How do you navigate that challenge?
It's really simple. You have to understand their demands and needs. You have to understand their needs, and that is a consumer duty. You cannot sell a product to someone if they don't have a need. Simple. So if you cannot sell a product to someone that doesn't have a need, then you can't sell them a product. So our responsibility is to make sure that they have a product that suits their needs, and that's why it's so important to understand their problems, understand what is it they're looking for, what can it do for them, what impact would it have if they didn't have this in place, you know? So some of those curious questions, you can call it, because you really need to understand their problems so that then you can provide the product as the solution for them. But guess what? It's their decision to make at the end of the day after that. You can provide all the information And after all that, the customer can still say no, and that's okay. But as long as you come off that phone call going, have I done everything I can? Did I treat this customer? Did I give them all the information that they needed? And make that own sanity check for you at the end of the phone call, because then you can then move on to the next one.
Is there any sort of sales strategies that the insurance sector is trying to implement where they're not targeting, vulnerable customers? Where, because we had again this conversation where it seems to be a lot of people don't have, they have insurance for many other things, their cars, their jewelry, but they never have life insurance for their life or insurance for their life. Is there strategies then that the industry is taking to actually try to promote, people getting insurance for their life prior to them being in that vulnerable state?
Yeah, completely. If you think the way of the world now, everything is on social media. The business is on social media, and I think who isn't on social media? So Meta is the way of the world, and I think advertising is the way to go. But you still have an obligation when you have that person on that phone call to make sure they aren't vulnerable, because you don't be selling to vulnerable customers. We take vulnerable customers very seriously in our business. We don't want to be selling to anyone that is vulnerable. And there's different criteria for someone who is vulnerable, right? There's different social, I can't remember the word of it, but there's different scenarios on where they base a customer who is vulnerable. They could be financially vulnerable. They could be ability to understand information to make an informed decision. So there's different avenues on that. But I think it's how do you tackle that, and how do you deal with that in the moment? Because with you doing advertising, you don't really know who's going to come through. But
for sure, you're based on what you were saying in terms of the people that have had a bereavement, had a child, or have taken out a mortgage. They're psychologically vulnerable. So isn't that life insurance's target audience? So the moment they've contacted you because, okay, why are you taking out life insurance? Oh, somebody close to me just passed away. Mm-hmm. Wouldn't that be then indirectly targeting a vulnerable customer?
Well, you can define vulnerability in different ways. And you mentioned a word there, psychologically, right? But again, you have to then have that judgment call on that phone call. Is it right for me to provide a solution to this customer in that moment in time? Because I've heard calls where customers are crying down the phone. Does it feel right to sell to that customer in that moment in time? Definitely not.
Then I had a question written down that I was going to ask you, and based on what you just said, I think I've got the answer, but maybe it's one that you can even take away and go and ask your team. But I think based on the way you lead your team, I know the answer there as well. And the question was, what's more important to you, closing the deal or doing the right thing? I'm going to ask it anyway, but based on what you've just said, I think we've got the answer.
Really simply, doing the right thing always comes first.
Do you think if you ask that question so I know you've got sales teams all over the UK, mm-hmm. Do you think if you ask that question to all of the sales teams, you'd get the same answer? Nice, that's good to hear.
I agree. I believe, and the reason why I can say that confidently is when you work with a close-knit team who has the same values as you, I'd like to believe that they would also do the right thing. And that's the thing. When you've worked somewhere and you understand, you believe the values of what the business offers, doing the right thing comes first. Because guess what? If you do the right thing first, the sales will come anyway with it.
I like that.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of closing questions. So before we get onto it, is there anything you wanted to, any more questions?
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions, and it's one to discuss the future. How do you see sales strategies evolving in the future, given the continuation in that kind of increased level of scrutiny from regulation, should I say?
Mm-hmm. There's a really simple phrase, and it's one from one of my close mentors. And I think in the scenario that we are, life insurance is bought, it's never sold. So if you think about that, you're never gonna. No one's gonna wake up in the morning and go, do you know what? I'm gonna buy life insurance today. It just doesn't happen. There always has to be an advert or a social media image or logo, whatever it is, or a thought-provoking advert, and that's great that marketing can do that, but then you then have to still sell the benefits of that life insurance. So I think life insurance will continue to be there. with the intention of you always have to sell that life insurance because no one's going to wake up and just decide to buy it.
Yeah.
It's a very it's an emotive product.
Yeah.
You guys have spoken about already about the vulnerability, but you're dealing with people. So, and with people, you have great conversations and they can go through any avenues. So I think it's that life insurance is sold, it's never bought.
Yeah. I was actually surprised with doing some other research, finding that on average in the UK households spend almost £2,500 on insurance, and life insurance being at the top of that now, which outweighs how much a household spends on alcohol, on clothing, on stuff like even furniture and stuff like that. So I think it's as an industry or as a service, it's definitely in increasing. Why do you think that's the case? Why do you think more people are paying attention to life insurance? And do you think that compliance has had a positive impact on that?
I'm surprised by those numbers. Because
he's probably made them up.
No, I was surprised myself. Yeah,
I'm surprised by those numbers because I still feel life insurance is a market that is underinsured. I still think customers are underinsured.
Checking the numbers now. Checking the numbers now.
And the reason why I say that is from the experience that I've got. It's always been a mass undermarket of insurance. People insure their cars, their homes, their contents, the stuff that they have is meaningful to them. But the last thing they think about is protecting their own lives. They do health insurance, but they'll do over life, and only really do it when a major event has happened, when the good and the bad. The good being, I've had my first grandchild, or I'm expecting, or bought our first house, versus someone's passed away, and that's really when they only think about it. So I am surprised by those numbers. I don't really agree with those numbers, to be honest.
So within that, I'll caveat that. So it is within the insurance, but the life insurance has been the biggest grower. So when I say insurance, it obviously encompasses what you said.
Yeah.
But in those 2 years, so 2022 was life insurance up by 8%.
Yeah.
And 2023 life insurance up by 5%, and that outweighs the other insurance categories.
So interestingly, the 8% growth is probably in relation to COVID.
Okay, yeah, makes sense.
Would be my suggestion on that. And I think with that scenario, it happened. Everyone experienced it. We know people that have lost people in that scenario, and I think that's where the bereavement side of things happened, and people wanted to protect themselves, which is understandable. So I think that's probably linked to that. But I also think the amount of I think positive news on that, positive adverts, positive communications. I think that's had a healthy positive experience towards it. The final part of your question was around compliance. Compliance play a positive part. They always do. And I think it's how do you embed and how do you embrace it and how do you work to that, because compliance and sales go hand in hand. They're both equally as important in my eyes and in the business. And if one's not there, there's going to be commercial gains, but I also think there's risk, vice versa.
I think this has been a refreshing discussion, even like longer in the tooth as I am. I feel like I've learned a lot, even in time discussing with you how sales, how sales and compliance can interact, and bringing a new perception again to how sales potentially view compliance and how we can promote compliance within sales.
Yeah.
So I think you've been able to explain, the benefits of compliance to myself and the benefits of compliance and sales and relationships again to those who are listening. So yeah, really, really good. I'm really infused to take away this conversation and have it elsewhere, and again, like best practices.
I've been quite fortunate to be in the position that I'm in, where I've got a nice hybrid, and that's what I think of it is. It's a hybrid. You can't sell without compliance, and compliance is so important. But and I think you mentioned the question is do the right thing. There's only one way for sustainability is to do the right thing.
We always, whenever we have guests, we want to wrap with a couple of questions. So we'll ask you, we're going to end with a couple of questions. And so the first question I had, and it's not necessarily related even to this discussion.
Okay.
I want you to tell me about something that didn't go well last week or in the last week. Tell me about something that hasn't gone well for you. It can be work, personal. Tell me about a failing, a problem, an issue you've encountered, something that hasn't gone well in the last week.
got an injury, personal injury. So we went for a run at the weekend and felt a little twinge my hamstring.
You're getting old.
Getting old. Cheers, mate.
Yeah.
Yeah, getting old. You know, it's catching up. Life's catching up. But yeah, I'd say for me, that's a not a nice thing that's happened.
Sign for you to take out life insurance.
Maybe health insurance, not life insurance in that moment in time.
Cool. And then on the flip side, tell me about a success. Tell me about something really good that's happened to you in the last couple of weeks, something that you're proud of, that you're pleased with, so we can leave on a high.
Great question. Couple of things. Got to spend time with family over a period. It's been really nice to spend some quality time with them. Recently, my children have started a new school. We've embedded them into a new school. They've come back rejuvenated, re-energized. That's always going to put a smile on my face. When I get to come home and get to see them, get to find out about their day, that's been really nice to see. And that's why I'm in this business, to help and support people, and go home to see my children, which I think has been great to do.
I love that. Great answer.
Really good answer.
Awesome.
Really good. Listen, thank you so much for your time, Jacob. I think this has been above what I thought it actually would achieve from this podcast. So, listen, you're welcome to come back anytime. We'd love to have you back on this.
Thanks for having me. It's been great to spend time with you, and yeah, we'd love to come back in another time, which would be great.
Amazing. Look, listen, guys, thank you so much for listening, watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see.
Be sure to like.
Be sure to like. Be sure to like, share, comment, and most importantly, subscribe to help this podcast reach many other people. And we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you, guys.
Cheers.
Good. I enjoyed that.